Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Open Up the Workforce, where we speak with leaders driving the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. I'm your host, Ahva Sadeghi, co-founder and CEO at Symba. Today, I'm joined by Dave Kim, NetApp's first Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Dave had an impressive career with over 2 decades of experience leading diversity, equity, and inclusion, having change at innovative companies. And I even noticed, Dave, that you are also an advisor on the board of a startup. So it's really exciting to see how much you support innovation. Dave, will you share a little bit more about your career journey with our audience, a little bit about who you are?
Thank you, Ahva. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Let me just start with a little bit of a problem. My mother does not know what I do for a living.
I think I can resonate with that a little bit.
It's not like you grow up and raising your hand, at least when I was growing up, that I wanted to be a chief diversity officer one day. And it's hard explaining kind of what I do, but when she noticed that I was going to Capitol Hill on a quarterly basis as a member of the Apex or Tri-Caucus board, or, I was working with the UN He for She movement and partnering there, and she just kept asking me, like, what do you do again? And how is this kind of part of your role? And it's in the context of, I think business doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It's based on relationships. It's based on relationships with our leaders, our team members, our customers, and our communities that we're in. And that's how I got into D&I. It was through an initial conversation with then our Chief Ethics and Diversity Officer at Dell. That's where I think being there for 14 years had an incredible experience of growing and being moved around and really adding to the toolbox of experiences to make a difference. And Thurman Woodard, the late Thurman Woodard, was a partner with Roosevelt Thomas, introduced me to a lot of key leaders in the area at the time. Ted Childs, Janetta B. Cole, the late Secretary of Labor, she's still alive, but in a different role, Alexis Herman, and then leaders like Gilbert Casillas, who used to run the EEOC and general counsel under the Clinton administration, were former bosses, mentors, sponsors. And the two things that I learned from that, one was you can't say no to yourself, right? So when you look at imposter syndrome, or when you look at opportunities, I think it's a huge detriment when you say no to making a difference. And I see that opportunity today with everything that's happening, the attacks on DNIB and other areas. We'll get into that. And the second thing I learned is if you're really fighting for equity or marginalized communities, and you're just doing it on behalf of your own community, that does not build a ecosystem inside companies. You need to champion across all marginalized groups, ensure there's no bias that stands, and make systemic changes and meet the needs of your employees and being people focused. And that's going to really drive the sustainable kind of growth mindset of inclusive culture and inclusive leadership in an organization. And so those were some key kind of moments, and it's really tied to those relationships of those leaders pouring into me. And now the challenge that I kind of raise to all of your listeners is, how do you raise up those types of individuals that are not seen or not fully being able to contribute or engage because of systemic kind of issues, and reaching out and lifting together, which lifts the entire boat. So those are some of the two kind of key areas for me. And I stand on the shoulders of, I think, broad shoulders of some, at least in my mind, giants.
Yes, absolutely. I think, when you mention the names of the mentors and the folks who really have supported you, it's inspiring. And I'm not sure if you know this about my background, but I actually was working at State Department in DC. I was actually kind of going towards that pathway. And so much of what I do now with Symba and diversity, equity, inclusion, we work a lot with tech companies and life sciences, but, it kind of was a shift because I thought I was going to be working in the public sector. And I thought that was going to be my career. And I was very fortunate to do a fellowship with late Congressman John Lewis, which actually was like what spurred a lot of, what we're doing behind Symba. And I feel like with this space, I can do more. I feel like I can actually create impact because I'm seeing people access and get access to a job and have a long-term career opportunity that, definitely empowers them and creates sustainability for them long term. I'd love to understand, was there like a moment that you thought that I'm going to go to the corporate side or, make my efforts in tech from, you mentioned Capitol Hill and some of the work you were doing in the public sector?
Yeah, and I think the key moment for me was that relationship with the late Thurman Woodard at Dell. We had Bill Gray as a board member, and it's being introduced to those relationships. And basically, he offered me a role. He was at the time, Thurman Woodard was at the time battling cancer. And his initial kind of battle, he returned back into the workplace, and we're having a hallway conversation around him and he was sick and tired of being at home and watching Oprah with his wife, and he wanted to kind of get back into the mix of making a difference. And in that conversation, it extended into, I think, over an hour, and it turned into a job interview. And he was requesting me to think about a career change, because I was in HR, information management at the time, or information systems at the time, with a background in consulting. And so it was sort of a door opening moment for me. And we had the pleasure and honor of working with him for 2.5 years until he lost that battle with cancer. But I wouldn't give up that for anything. He really instilled in me. And by the way, I'll just openly, transparently share, I don't think I was a very good leader at the time. So for anybody at Dell listening to this, I say I was not a very good leader at the time. But he instilled in me in 2.5 years what the potential of good leadership could be. And then that expanded into other mentors like Gil and others that kind of showed like what an impact leadership can make into a culture, and to do this the right way from a systemic perspective, and then to develop and foster relationships like we talked about with certain stakeholders and external organizations. Because if you are going to make progress, you are never going to do it by yourself, just your team. It really needs to involve a lot of functions and groups to make systemic change inside a company. And then, of course, outside in society, even billion-dollar companies just cannot do it on their own. We need sort of unified coalitions and partners, like-minded, to make progress from a societal standpoint. And we could talk a little bit about that a little bit later too. But those were, all those pivotal moments for me anyways are around certain individuals that have sponsored and driven sort of capturing their imagination initially and then actualizing it.
Absolutely. And the fact that you're open to them, right? The fact that it turns into an opportunity and being open to, embracing those changes and pivots. I'm always inspired to see the stories of folks that I meet that are leading this work and how they got started. And some start off in engineering, where they were the only person, and they said, I want to change that narrative. And something you said, Dave, was kind of interesting to me, just because I'm a very young leader and I've been learning a lot about leadership. And you mentioned that you weren't a very good leader at the time. Is that just because of experience, or is there anything that you want to unpack there? Because I find that to be interesting that you mention it.
Yeah, I think it's lack of experience. I think a lot of incorrect assumptions, right? So, for example, going into meetings trying to impress versus going into meetings or going into things trying to make a difference on behalf of yourself, the team, and the company. I think, an awareness of bias. And I'm not saying you need to reinvent yourself, because your whole self should come to work in an inclusive culture. But having the skills in your toolbox to really pick from in varying different kinds of situations, I think as a young leader, you don't have that. And that's where I think sponsorship and championing is going to be pivotal. So you have an environment where you can actually make mistakes, and it's going to be okay. I'm a huge champion of design thinking and agile kind of tools. And what I like about that is really be customer focused, whether it's internal or external, and make it good enough, and very quickly deploy, and then learn from that and iterate, right? So it's not about rolling out perfect things, and I'm talking about yourself as well, but it's really an iterative process where you're very quickly rolling things out and iterating and adjusting, because now the rate of change inside companies and markets are just so aggressive. that we don't have time in companies to spend years developing a product or rolling out leadership capability, or, we just need to very much focus on learning, iterating, and growing that way. And so I think, those are some of my kind of pitfalls earlier on, and just very thankful for those leaders. Any manager that had me, just thank you for creating an environment to where I can grow and learn and making it safe, because many of those leaders had my back, and trying to kind of instill that into the leadership teams here in NetApp.
That's inspiring. I think that, as a startup founder, we're always like, what's the MVP version? Like, what is at least that we, create that value, and just taking that example to ourselves and at least, learning and iterating. I think that's really powerful. Something I'm going to take with me and really think about thoughtfully. Moving deeper into this conversation around diversity as a strategic business decision and initiative, I'd love to understand some specific examples where embracing diversity has really led to innovation, creativity, and improved decision-making within NetApp and some of the other companies you've been leading this work at.
Yeah, let me kind of talk about the context a little bit first, and then I'll talk about our strategy a little bit, and then give some examples. So prior to the pandemic, there were some really large issues, at least in the US, around police violence, and that created sort of what can we do for marginalized groups. And then when, the pandemic kind of got started or was about to kind of really fully roll out, we saw horrible deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor in our living rooms and social media right in front of our faces, right? And I think that just really rocked our society, and it just even bled into other countries. And a lot of companies really made bold statements about our commitment and what we're going to do to support these communities and our employees. And once the pressures of growth just kind of happened in that pandemic environment, we saw a lot of companies just grow very quickly. A lot of CEOs get a lot of pressure to grow and put pressure on supply chain and a number of other areas. Now, coming out of post-pandemic, the market completely shifted, right? So now we're seeing a lot of companies, and I'm just even reading the news today, and there's articles about layoffs. And so companies now, when the markets have shifted or there's market volatility, we are now looking at some drastic measures to be fit and lean and fight for market share and revenue and profit. And when that happens, some companies very quickly reduce their recruiting teams, their talent teams, and now D&I teams. And so that's the context. And I think bleeding into, what the promises of D&I be around innovation, good, better, faster decision-making, around bottom line financial performance is not actualized, because some companies have sort of checked the box of bolt-on programs, right? They think EBRGs, or we call them EBRGs and NetApp, Employee Business Resource Groups, training, mandatory training, check the box exercises, and then they're done. When those pressures happen, it's very easy to go back on those commitments. Our strategy is to really integrate D&IB into all of our talent processes. It's to integrate into our business processes and make it the cultural norms. So it's not just building leadership capability. It's inclusive leadership. It's not just building high-performing teams, but high-performing diverse teams. It's really integrating into the performance measures of how behaviors that we see in cultural kind of areas to ensure that D&IB accomplishes the performance piece of it, the innovation piece of it, the leadership piece of it. So with that, some just very quick, we recently, and I've only been with NetApp for a year, but I think in that time of foundation building and building a team and making sure there's budget and resources and commitment from the top, which we have, we were able to integrate into our largest external facing Insights sales conference and integrate D&IB, not only in the diversity of speakers, but how we can make sure that artificial intelligence and our giving and our social impact and the diversity makeup of our customers and partner together to support the needs of diverse communities and talent areas was rolled out. So it's been a number of years since we had Insight, and it was a great opportunity to integrate DNIB into that space with our customers. We're all struggling with going back to hybrid environment in a change management perspective, ensuring that no one gets left behind. Some companies have taken to mandates of 2 to 3 days in the office. We want to be a bit more thoughtful around what kind of jobs, what kind of areas, what is the flex in that truly to create a hybrid environment. And so DNIB, of course, and its impact to either early career, post-career, our disabled populations, how we think about accommodations. What does it look like from a global footprint perspective? And what does that mean for an Asian country that's a little bit different than maybe a European country or the US? And then lastly, everyone is looking at performance, productivity, agility, and talent enablement to support their business strategies. And so that's our example of integrating DNIB practices. Again, it's not just building high-performing teams, but as we look at that infrastructure or framework, how do we include the DNIB piece of it, the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece, to have a belonging kind of culture focused on our people? So those are some key areas for us. And I think, the important part of that is, what is the priority of the company? What is the priority of the HR function? What is happening outside the company? And then how do we respond with our priorities? And if your D&I priorities are not integrated into what I just said, then it may be a bolt-on activity. It may be a check-the-box activity, and it is not going to produce the outcome or the actualization of those promises that we were talking about.
It's really insightful. I think that I couldn't agree more when you talk about how critical it is to be integrated, and also tie this back into the business priorities and objectives. And it was great to hear some of the examples of how you actually manifest this within AI and putting together a conference, ensuring that diversity. I would love to go back to kind of what you said at the beginning of the context, painting the context, because I think at this moment, it's a very critical moment where we're kind of understanding what is the future of diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think we're seeing leaders step up. We're seeing those cut. What do you think is going to happen, and really leaders need to do right now to ensure that these efforts that happened back in 2020, 2021, these commitments are sustainable, and we're not just like a moment in time commitment?
Yeah. I think, I actually spoke at a conference earlier this week, and, the theme of that conference was, this is a critical time to double down on DNIB efforts. But if your strategy is putting lipstick on a pig, right, these bolt-on activities, it will ultimately fail. And those companies, it'll be very easy to just go back and renege on those commitments. But if you truly are integrating DNIB into your talent practices, into your hiring practices, into your workforce planning practices, right, where you're thinking about what talent, capability, or enablement do you need to even launch an area of AI, if that's what your business is focused on, or a new market, or globalization, then it becomes a business priority. Now you're talking about, right, how can we really achieve the business needs, the HR needs, or talent needs, the cultural needs that are going to define success? And you can measure that. So right now, I think, and I'm just going to make some statements. So if your listeners if you disagree with me, I think it's fine. We could have some conversations after. But in general, I just don't think we have good data in this space, right? I mean, the research is voluminous in terms of like the benefits of DNIB and business practices. But how do you actualize that? How do you integrate and make systemic change to produce and support those promises that we just talked about around innovation or better decision-making, or, getting to financial performance? And so I think it's the key of integrating it into those practices so it becomes part of the culture. You have to put in the growth mindset pieces in there, like we talked about, innovating and reiterating. And a key piece of that is to build very strong relationships with those communities all the way to the top. And we do it with employee resource groups. And I think if you have that kind of strategy and approach, now you're talking at the table with business leaders, with board members, with institutional investors, because now you're talking about business performance. You're talking about talent capability. You're talking about the things that really improve productivity. And that's what companies are looking for, right? That's what they're looking at. And so we need to cultivate, I think, data in all those areas. And just like financial performance, we measure finance. It's a business process. There's an accounting process. You as a CEO are looking at financial metrics and business strategy metrics on a regular basis. It has to be the same with D&IB. It's not a soft skill. It's not a soft thing. It's not a good to have and nice to have. When I was starting this career, I even heard individuals say, I'm working myself out of a job. Once we get equality, we're done. It's a feel-good exercise. It's a lot more complicated now, right? It's about what value are you bringing when companies are leaning and trying to fight every inch of that marketplace revenue and profit, right? And really, from an employee perspective, it's about leadership and talent capability, as I mentioned, the culture of winning. But we need enabling systems, we need training, we need support, and we need to integrate that and to redefine what good leadership looks like and measures of performance around the D&I piece, especially, I think. With reducing risk, if you do that right, you at the same time reduce risk when companies do get attacked, because companies are getting attacked on a regular basis now. I'm reading news articles and social media articles on a regular basis about groups now attacking companies, governors or GAs writing letters, formal letters around D&IB practices to Fortune 500 companies. And so it's, what are you trying to achieve? Not a quota-based system, but removing bias. It's getting to those, I think, expanding your aperture, as I mentioned, for all groups and improving performance with inclusion and equity in mind. And so I think those are some key things, mindset-wise, data-wise, and practice-wise, that we need to insert into the boardroom and the CEO leadership teams.
I couldn't agree more. I think you captured every single element of like what is needed. And I think that one of the challenges I oftentimes see is that sometimes when something is so integrated, it doesn't feel like it's a one-to-one, right? When you have like a sales input, there's an output, and you can like see that lever. Sometimes with really integrated practices, there's a lot of different levers that manifest into building that out. So it takes a really strategic leader who's looking at this in a very holistic way to understand the value. And then also, I think that puts a lot of burden on D&IB leaders to make sure that they're also speaking the language of what the leadership team knows. So I think, it is some sort of design thinking exercise of how do I communicate this and really tie everything back to that. And I think it's a really critical time for leaders in the space to really actively and proactively do that, because it's an art and a science, right? You said there's data behind it for the business impact, but then there's also, people will be attacked, organizations will be attacked. And I think this next generation is more vocal than ever. And we have access to social media. And you said, you could see it on your phones. It's in information is shared so quickly now. So you really do need to be mindful of these things, because you can't slide them under the rug, right? If you're really building a organization that sustains and provides value. And so I love that you shared that you also work with communities, and this is a bigger effort than just one business. And I truly believe in that. How do you think about, tapping into the community and the broader efforts that you support?
Yeah. As I mentioned before, I don't think one company or one group can really make a penetrating difference into social impact. It takes a coalition, it takes partnership, it takes other companies. And that is our kind of view of making an impact. We're a data company, a data integration company, and you need good data for things even like artificial intelligence sit on and a hybrid sort of cloud environment to support. And so our view is just contextually, there was this digital divide, right? 1.0, where everybody was talking about access to the internet, because in many countries outside of the US, they didn't have an internet infrastructure or access to the internet at the base level. I think it evolved into digital divide of 2.0, where once you get access, now how do you kind of maneuver through the internet to really gain and leverage the power there? Now I think we're fully into digital divide 3.0. it's not enough to be able to maneuver through the internet, but how do you really leverage the power of AI or data, right? And so for us, we're focused on that. We're focused on reducing the data divide, and we're doing it with the most marginalized groups, not only in the US, but around the world. We're partnering with UNESCO and World Largest Lesson to meet the needs of underserved communities. And we're looking at, thousands of children worldwide to be able to make progress in that area and space. We shared and launched the ability through additional grants and incentives to all of our customers at Insight. It's an example of integration. And we had some speakers at Insight that talked about the digital divide and the power of AI for good or AI for all. And we're on the cusp of sort of making a difference in that way. And internally, it's around enabling processes for our employees to get involved. And we've identified ways for our employee resource groups with funding and grants and ability to match that effort there. And so I'm very excited about our Data Explorer program, that it's called that, and very excited about inviting especially our customers and partnering with us to make a difference in the communities worldwide.
That's exciting. I'd love to hopefully attend one day, Insights and Learn. I think it's really important and powerful. It's great to hear about how you're reaching out to community and at such a scale. It's really important. Any tips for leaders in this space around AI, the actions they should be taking if they're not already around this conversation of AI for good?
Yeah, I think for us, it's a great start because it's a little bit easier for us since our core values have belonging and community. So it's part of our culture to integrate these opportunities everywhere we are in our strategic areas of growth. I think, so that's number one. It's like, how do we tie these efforts into who you are as a company in terms of your values? That answers the WIFM of One Center for You and invites, I think, our employees to make a difference. But a part of that is awareness building, right? It's to say, look, our education system is not teaching around data literacy. So the technology has grown faster than what exists today in our school and education systems. The people or children that are the most left behind are diverse populations and communities, right? And so with those groups being left behind, it doesn't just hurt that community, but it actually hurts all of us, not only in the industry, economic prosperity perspective as a nation, but I think globally as well, right? Because we're missing out on that talent making a difference. And then thirdly, it's just once you build awareness, once your core value and enter the WIFM, it's now how do we build enablement tools or processes to get people. So it's really easy. So one thing that we did in a week of giving towards the end of the calendar year was we provided, as an example, just a $10 gift to go donate to your favorite charity. And we shared, here's some key areas around data literacy as an example of where you can donate, and kind of shared our new relationships to make a difference. And we almost tripled the amount of engagement and participation. And of course, our employees gave more than that and offer their time as well and share their stories. And I think there's some power in sharing stories, but it just takes nudges and an enabling system to do what's right. And we're looking at thinking about nudges and right time information right before a decision, even around inclusion or bias as well in everything that we do. And I think that's what it's going to take, these powerful stories, nudges at the right time, and just pieces of learning throughout.
I appreciate that. I think we need these stories because that's how we learn, especially for me, and how I remember things even through storytelling. And it can bring us to believe in certain stories. So I love that aspect as well. And nudges and really thinking about the behavioral economics of why we make decisions and how we do things the way we do. It's really important. And I know there's so many different types of individuals and they're motivated by different things. So you have to do everything that you can. And In a lot of ways, you already answered this question, but this is the question we wrap up our podcast asking all the leaders. And it's around our mission, open up the workforce. And to us at Symba, that means a future of work that is equitable and provides equal access to wealth creation. We'd love to get your perspective on what are the necessary steps that we need to take in order to truly open up the workforce.
Yeah, I think inside the company, again, it's about some of these cultural norms that we talked about. But how do you make it sticky and real, right? And then how do you tie it to reward systems? So it's not enough where we say we expect good leadership. You have to define what those are and make progress. And from my perspective, now kind of switch that on to say, what is a good inclusive leader? That is a standard we're going to hold as a company. And we're going to reward based on that, whether it's a promotion, whether greater responsibilities. And if you don't, and you fail in meeting that expectation, then what are the consequences, right? So I know that when key leaders in some of the tech companies years ago took the helm, or even some of the CEOs that I've worked with, I'm not going to mention specific names, but, when we brought up and said, hey, our engagement scores around this area, but unfortunately, this person is hitting the ball out of the park from a sales perspective and bringing revenue, right? So now it's a dilemma. On one hand, performance from a business perspective and sales and growth is fantastic. But from a value and culture perspective, this individual is struggling and failing. So we had a conversation, and it's a hip discussion. Second time around, higher revenues, higher sales, but worse engagement scores and worse team building and worse talent capability. And now maybe some statements that are offensive to women and some other communities. Third time around, our leadership said, this is not the type of leader we need in the company. Great job and thank you for that sales growth. And we will move on to another type of leader that is going to drive what we believe even more growth, and do it with the team and do it in a value-based situation. So it's the rubber where the rubber meets the road, I think, in terms of we say a lot of wonderful, heartwarming things about our values and culture, but if it's not if it doesn't have teeth, it's putting lipstick on a pig. And that's not going to produce the innovation or the fast decision-making or the right types of performance measures that we want to see. And so it's not just the what's of performance, but the how of performance and behaviors, and does it align with our values and our culture? And that's the type of culture we need to create to perform and increase productivity. And I think that's kind of what it's going to take from an employee perspective. This work at DNIB is not just marketing. It's not just being politicized and weaponized from outside in and responding to that from a compliance standpoint. This has true measurable impact around culture, as Peter Drucker famously said, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. He's not saying strategy is unimportant, but if you really want a straight line to success and performance and productivity, that culture and inclusive leadership is, I think, to add to that, is essential to have a powerful and empowered employee base to support success.
That's a powerful note to wrap up our conversation on. In so many ways, I think of culture as the soil. Do you have good soil where things can take root and really evolve and cultivate into what you need? The example you shared is really powerful in so many ways, because that would be a moment where teams can decide otherwise. And you made a decision that aligned with your values. And for us at Symba, we were part of the paid internship pledge, and we had a really exciting opportunity with an organization that didn't pay their interns. And it would have been really great for our growth. And as a startup, you're not usually in a place to say no to anyone who wants to work and give you money and partner. But we had to say no because it didn't align with our values. And so, I think it's important that we continue to exercise that muscle and ensure that muscle is strong, because it's how we set precedents and how we continue to grow as an organization and then just really as a society. So appreciate the work that you're doing and all the great insights that you've shared for our listeners. Dave, is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, just kind of full circle. when you see an opportunity to make a difference in your company or in your personal life, please don't say no to yourself. Let that group or whatever situation sort of say no to you, right? Don't limit your opportunities. And right now in the D&I space, if you are part of corporate America in your companies, there's a huge opportunity to make a difference in the D&IB space because we are all focused on making our companies better and on behalf of our employees and customers. And so I hope that kind of resonates. And I think we make little progress if each of us did that together.
I love that. Do not say no to yourself. Thank you so much, Dave, for all the work that you're doing in the space and for spending some time with our listeners. It was incredible to learn more about your work and the great things you're doing.
Great. Thank you, Ahva. It was a pleasure.
Wonderful.